Hello and welcome back to this Down Palladialistic Crusade. Today I'm talking about the third in the Avon series of books from the 1970s, starring the legendary ghost who walks himself, the Phantom, all based around the original Immortal comic strip from the newspapers started and created by Lee Falk. Falk wrote the original volume in this series, which I reviewed, which is basically a retelling of the Phantom's origin, expanded into novel form. Then book 2 was ghostwritten by Basil Copper, who also wrote book 3, which is the Scorpia Menace. This is the Hermes Press reprint. Like I've talked about, they did do the entire Avon series, and this is printed in a larger style with the original very pulpy paperback artwork lovingly reproduced on a larger scale. And to give you an idea of that scale, of course, as I mentioned, this is the only original Avon printing I have, but you can see obviously the original is a typical paperback dimension, and then this reprint is a little bit larger, obviously, but not the full trade paperback size of like a comic or graphic novel. But it does, give you a bit more of a premium feel. Feels nice in the hand, and the art is really well reproduced, and then has this nice uniform style. So they all go together on the shelf, and then they all have these custom rear covers with the front cover artwork, front piece, key art actually reproduced on the back. Now, this book, again, like most of the Avon books, they are ghost written, except for the first one and one or two others written by series creator and primary writer Lee Falk. And you can tell the difference between the ones that he wrote and the ones that are ghost written. This one, again, was ghost written by Basil Copper, who wrote the previous volume, Book 2, The Slave Market of Mukar. I do think this book is actually an improvement. I like the story better. Like all of these, it is just basically a pulpy, fun adventure story. And while some people might label elements of this book a little bit cliched in their nature due to just the sort of story elements, I found it a real blast. It's done with energy and spirit, so you can overlook those things because every once in a while you just need a good, what used to be termed a good adventure yarn. I also appreciate that this gives the heroine of the Phantom World, Diana Palmer, a bit more to do, and she is not your typical damsel in distress and gets involved in this sort of nefarious scheme of this worldwide evil secret organization, of course, because you always have to have one of those. The whole reason why she gets involved is she is a history major among her many other feats and is doing essentially her grad school research project on this ancient organization that's referenced throughout history and mythology, and that maybe there's something more there than what seems to be on the surface. And of course, the criminal organization that seems to be perhaps a myth or that existed centuries ago, of course it still exists, and it's a secret brotherhood, and it has worldwide operations, and this news makes their ears perk up that maybe this girl is going to uncover something, so maybe they need to just snuff her out. And it just so happens that she, of course, is the betrothed of the Phantom. So there is a nice bit of tie back to the first volume, the origin volume, where this story essentially picks up where Kit Walker, the Phantom, and Diana Palmer left off. So it is nice to read these in chronological order, and these are, again, drawing from the long-running newspaper strip. So they are adaptions, but they're also getting to expand upon things. And as I've mentioned in other videos, I really enjoy anytime a comic character, whether it's a strip or comic book character, when the stories get to be expanded upon in book or novel form. I really enjoy that because I personally prefer the book form over the comic form. I like getting the additional detail and the internal monologues much more. I'm much more of a novel person in terms of just how my brain works and what I like to read. So actually finding out that there were Phantom novels, and let alone 15 Phantom novels, I was like, okay, I have to read these at some point. So this is a really fun story. It moves at a good pace. You be able to point out there are very obvious story contrivances, and some things are very coincidental. It just so happens that this secret worldwide criminal organization just so happens to have representatives that are close enough to where Diana Palmer is in her small college town in the U.S. that they would get wind of the local news story about her research project and then report it back to their superiors. And of course, it just so happens she is the girlfriend of the Phantom, and then the leader sees a photo of her and becomes immediately obsessed with her, so orders her not just killed but kidnapped and brought back to their island fortress, and then they fake her own death too. So there's a lot of very obviously classic adventure story bits, and again, some people might label these as cliches, but I don't really think that applies in this case, because this is a pure out-and-out adventure story, and it is well told, and because it moves with a good pace, it never drags and it never gets on the reader's nerves, and there's a certain charm to a lot of these sort of building blocks of adventure stories that, again, you could term them cliches, but they're done with such a charm to them, and they're done with such a swiftness that you really don't mind. And the story builds to, of course, the Phantom parachuting into the island fortress at night and doing a one-man assault to rescue his betrothed. And it is just as gloriously wonderful as that sounds. So if the idea of the Ghost Who Walks himself parachuting into a secret enemy base at night and doing a one-man assault where he takes out the entire group of enemies and guards and everything with his wits and his bare hands and his legendary skills as the Ghost Who Walks. If that starts to tickle your fancy, if that intrigues you, then this book is for you. I think that's the real sort of litmus test. If that notion, if this cover where you actually do have the Phantom parachuting in at night for this nighttime raid by himself, that's again, it's a litmus test. If that rings any bells for you, then you will love this book. So I think there's a greater immediacy than the previous volume because of the involvement of Diana as a character. And again, it's so refreshing to have a female character love interest who does things on her own, can actually take care of herself, and actually has a character. So you don't often get that in even classic adventure stories. It really varies. The love interest is almost always underdeveloped in all of adventure stories. So that's another reason why I've always loved the Phantom, because the love interest of Diana Palmer was so much stronger than your typical sort of damsel in distress. So I like her being involved here, and I just think the story is so much fun. It does move with a good pace, but that also means that it's actually a bit shorter than the other books. This clocks in at about 143 pages, and really my only major problem is it ends so suddenly. Basically, as soon as that final action set piece is over, the book just kind of ends. So that is, I think, representative of what it is basing itself off of, which of course is the iconic newspaper strip. So since those stories were serialized, and once an arc finishes, then it would just move on to the next one. So I think that is replicated here. I just wish there was maybe a little bit more in terms of the last couple pages, but it does end well, and it ends where it should. It just feels a little bit abrupt when you're reading this, but it's just so much fun, and I really enjoyed this one. So I would say it is actually, for me, I think it's a little bit better than the previous volume. So these two that Basil Copper wrote, this would be my favorite of the two. And that's not to say that book two was bad. It's just it didn't quite grab me as much as this one did. So even though this one's a little shorter, and the whole plot setup is seemingly distilled out of classic adventure elements, every once in a while you just need something like that. So that's why I'm really enjoying reading these one at a time and just going through the Avon books. And again, I've read various bits of the original newspaper strip, so I knew some of the stories going in, but the access to a lot of the strips outside of the Hermes reprints, which unfortunately I missed a lot of the first volumes that are now out of print. But before that point, there was not really any access to them here in the U.S. So I've just sort of read bits and pieces scattered throughout the years, and I've read various comics and short story collections and different things. So finally getting to read some of the novels based on the classic strips and get expanded versions of the story arcs is really wonderful. So I do highly encourage anyone who is interested in the character of the Phantom or loves classic adventure stories of the original Golden Age pulp characters of the 30s and 40s. I think these are wonderful reads, and I do encourage you to check them out at Hermes Press's website. They do still have most of them in print, and you can find some of them at various other retailers, but you do kind of have to hunt around if you're trying to complete a set of them. It is actually a pretty good deal for all of these, considering what the price of the original Avon paperbacks go for. I originally was going to try and piece together a set of the original paperbacks, but just looking at them on eBay every once in a while, to buy a whole set in good condition, it ranges from around $100 to $200 or more. So they don't pop up all the time, and they are quite pricey when they do. I've only ever found that one particular copy that was a bit beat up in a used bookshop, and that's what got me looking at the reprints. And then they had a bundle on their website for a while where you could get all 15 of them. So I just decided, why not take the plunge? And I'm really glad I did. So I do actually think it's pretty good to just go ahead and get the reprints, and the quality is really excellent. But I would recommend, if you're interested in these, you might want to try picking some of these up sooner rather than later, because once Phantom releases from Hermes Press go out of print, they do become collectibles on the used market, and the prices start to skyrocket, which of course is what has happened with the initial volumes of the newspaper strip reprints, which I wish I had started getting years ago, because now they're up to significant numbers of volumes, and all of the early ones are long out of print, unfortunately. So again, if you miss out on these, you're kind of flat out of luck, unless you want to jump into searching on the used market. So as always, I hope this has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I rarely get the chance to talk about my love of the character and the world of the Phantom, and getting to finally read the Avon paperbacks, it's really just enriching that love and adoration I've had since I was a kid and I was first introduced to the character. These are wonderful stories. They're great, fun adventures, and I wholeheartedly recommend them to all Phantom fans and all fans of classic superhero adventure stories. So as always, do keep supporting independent bookstores and publishers by reading and buying print books. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.